as people are joining, I'll just remind people why we've organized this town hall. Obviously, I'm no longer a candidate in the leadership race, but when I made the tough decision to suspend my campaign about 2.5 weeks ago, I made a promise to my supporters that I would finish the job of creating my platform. At the outset of the campaign, I promised a 7-plank platform, and by the time I suspended the campaign, we had 5, so there are 2 more to go. And so on that day that I suspended my campaign, we had one farewell town hall. I thought it was going to be the last one, but in that town hall, I made a promise that I'd finish the platform, and so that's what we're doing today. And like Tom said, yeah, we're going to be talking about the final 2 planks. The 6th, it has to do with revenue reform, and the final one has to do with climate change and climate resilience. So how are we doing for numbers, Tom?
We're good. It seems like everybody the numbers have stabilized, so everybody who wants to come in is in, I guess, and so we're ready to roll.
Okay, well, sounds good. Well, before I get to the 2 final planks, I just want to say a few words on a number of other topics. First, for those who have sent messages and made calls to me, I want to thank you for your support and for your kind words. And for those who are wondering if I'm okay, yes, I'm okay. Obviously it was a tough decision that we made when we decided to suspend the campaign. When I got into this, it was because I really wanted to, present my ideas and take a real shot at becoming the next leader of the party. But for one reason or another, the campaign didn't catch fire, and we just didn't have enough money to continue. So, but I'm glad I threw my hat into the ring. I feel like together we've made a real difference in terms of the conversations that are being had by the other candidates, and I think that the ideas that we've put on the table are going to make a real difference, not just in terms of the conversation in the leadership race, but eventually what we put together as a platform and a strategy for the next provincial election. So I'm feeling pretty good that I may not be the next leader, but I feel like we've made a difference. And so I feel good about that. So thanks for your support, and I just want to reassure that everything's fine. And just before I begin, I just want to reiterate the point of my campaign, right? I decided to throw my hat into the ring because I understood that in order to beat the UCP in 2027, we have to build a winning coalition. And based on my experience as president of the Federation of Labor, and also all the polls that we were seeing, both public polls and internal polls, I have become convinced that there's a big hole in the coalition that we need to build in order to beat the UCP. And sadly, that hole is working people. All the polls that I've seen, including the polls done by the Federation of Labor itself, tell me that the New Democrats are winning among Albertans who identify themselves as middle class and among Albertans with university educations, but that we're actually losing to the UCP among Albertans who identify themselves as working class and who have trades educations, college educations, and high school educations. And that's not an insignificant group. It's about 45% of the population. And we're lagging behind in that group, not just outside of the big cities, but also in the big cities. And so, Alberta has become, close to a 50-50 province. And, but the last public polls that were released suggest that the UCP has actually maintained their lead, and that in an election we're called today, the results would be similar, and that we'd come close but not enough. So that sort of just reinforces, my feeling that if we want to win, if we want to build that coalition that's necessary to get us over the finish line, we have to do a better job as a party of reaching out to working people. And that's true in the cities, but it's also true outside of the cities. And if you've been following me, in these weeks of the leadership campaign, you'll know that this is kind of a double gut punch for me, because obviously I'm a worker advocate and a labor leader, but I also grew up in rural Alberta, and so to know that we're behind the UCP in rural Alberta, where I grew up, and also among working Albertans who I represent, that's, like I say, it's a double gut punch for me. So that's what motivated me to get into the race. And so what I tried to do is build a platform that would appeal to those people who are currently outside the tent, working people who we have to bring back in. And I recognize that we're not going to bring all of them back in, but we don't have to. We have to bring more, right? So starting at 8 weeks ago or 9 weeks ago when I threw my hat into the ring, and you can see this on our website, which is still up if you're interested. We had 5 big ideas that we canvassed, aimed at appealing to working class Albertans and convincing them that the New Democrats are their party and deserving of their support. So the first big idea was that we need to be the party that protects jobs and strengthens our economy by pivoting towards a lower carbon future. So that was the first plank. I'd encourage you to read it if you haven't already done so. The second plank was that we need to be the party with a plan to give Albertans a raise. This is a particular big issue for me as a worker representative and worker leader. In fact, at the Federation of Labor just last week, we released a big study that was put together by progressive economist Jim Stanford, and it basically outlined that Alberta has fallen behind other provinces in terms of wage growth, and in fact we've lost our wage advantage for basically the last 20-30 years. We've had the highest wages in the country. We've now lost that status as the highest wage jurisdiction to BC. And Ontario is now nipping at our heels. And the reason that's happening is because basically in every other province in this country, wages have not quite kept up with inflation, but they've been close. But here in Alberta, we've had the slowest wage growth among everyone, and Albertans are falling further behind inflation than any other Canadians. And so that explains a lot of the anxiety and even anger that Albertans are feeling, because their living standards are falling in real time. And so that was my second plank. I laid out a strategy for that the New Democrats as government could implement to make sure that wages keep up with inflation. That's not too much to ask, but the UCP has basically been the party of wage suppression. We could win the next election in part by becoming the party of wage growth. The third plank in the platform was my suggestion that, and this is related to the second one, but the third plank in my platform was to suggest that in order to win, especially among that key demographic that I've been targeting, we need to become the party of affordability. Because at the same time that wages have been stagnating and falling behind in Alberta, we have the dubious distinction of also having the highest rate of inflation among all provinces. So wages are going down, costs are going up, and I think there's a real opportunity politically here for us to cast ourselves as the party with a plan to make life more affordable, not just rhetorically, but with real policy. So things things like public auto insurance to bring down auto insurance rates, re-regulating power to bring our power rates down, introducing an excess profits tax to discourage grocery chains and oil companies from price gouging us. And those two things in particular have been big components in terms of the rising cost of living here in Alberta. And then of course a strategy for more affordable housing, right? So things like rent control, more a public housing authority, lots of ideas that could be ours and could help us win in the next election. So that's the third plank. The fourth plank in my platform had to do with reassuring Albertans about their health care. Because I think every Albertan, including people in that demographic that I'm targeting, understand that nothing else matters more than health. If you're not healthy, you can't live a good life. You can't live up to your potential in terms of your career. So in that plank, I lay out what the problem is. Partly it's underfunding. Partly it's lack of respect for our frontline healthcare workers. Partly it's about wages that are not keeping up with inflation, so that we're not able to attract and retain workers. But we need to have a plan to make sure that public health care is there when we need it. Similarly, the fifth plank was defending education, because education, especially for working people, access to high quality, affordable education, both K-12 and post-secondary, is key to getting the skills that people need to live up to their potential in terms of jobs and economic opportunity, both for themselves and their kids. So that's the 5 that I've released already. So the final 2 planks that I want to release today, they're already on our website, are plank number 6, which is paying for the programs and services that workers need by making profitable corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. So basically I'm talking about revenue reform to pay for quality public services. And then the final plank, which has to do with what I'm describing as climate resilience. And in particular, I think we need to create a sense of shared purpose among Albertans by calling on them to help build climate resilience in our province. So let me just, I'm going to flesh out what I mean on each of those. And once again, those final 2 planks are on the website, so you can look at them in more detail. But let's turn our attention to revenue reform. And basically my argument is this: our prosperity and security depend on foundational investments in things like education, healthcare, and infrastructure. Our economic future also depends on investments in things like diversification and climate resilience. In order to win the confidence of voters and win the next election, I feel strongly that the NDP needs to make it clear that we will fund these investments by making profitable corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. And we need to start that conversation by debunking the conservative narrative on taxes. In particular, we have to say that tax is not a dirty word. Taxes are the way we pool our resources to fund the things that we need, but can't afford individually. Things like education, healthcare, infrastructure. Decades ago, conservatives realized that voters actually like public programs and services, and promises to cut or privatize those services didn't help them win elections. So instead of going after the things that voters like, the programs and the services, they went after the things that voters didn't like taxes. So, by demonizing taxes, conservatives learned that they could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. They could win public support for dramatically cutting taxes for the wealthy and profitable corporations, which has really always been their top priority. But at the same time, they could shrink the size of government to justify things like privatization by claiming that the cupboard was bare, even though it was they themselves who had made it bare. So, the demonization of taxes has been at the heart of conservative political strategy for decades. And from their perspective, it has been a roaring success. And here in Alberta, there has been an added wrinkle, which is our vast resource wealth. This wealth has allowed successive governments here in Alberta to offer Canadian standard services to Albertans, while at the same time charging lower than Canadian standard taxes, especially for corporations and the wealthy. So it's a little bit of a financial sleight of hand. Instead of saving or investing resource revenue windfalls, they spent them to maintain artificially low taxes. So this explains why, after decades of resource development in our province, we currently have less than $20 billion saved in our Heritage Savings Trust Fund while Norway, which started to save its resource revenue windfalls much later than us, they have a savings fund worth more than $1 trillion. So, Alberta's approach of spending all of our resource windfalls to maintain artificially low taxes also helps explain the boom-bust roller coaster that has destabilized our public services for decades, and what I would describe as the remarkable disconnect between the health of the Alberta economy, which is often the strongest in the country, and the dismal health of our provincial government's balance sheet. This approach of spending our windfalls instead of saving them and using them to artificially maintain low taxes, this approach was never wise, and it was never sustainable, because it meant that funding for things like education, healthcare, and other public priorities was always subject to the vagaries of the oil and gas markets and the prices that go up and down. But now that the world is in the midst of a transition away from fossil fuels, and we're actually facing the prospect of all these revenues being substantially reduced or even disappearing entirely, it's clear that this approach is even more irresponsible. Sadly, despite some pre-budget rhetoric from Daniel Smith about mending our ways, the UCP's last two budgets have actually increased our reliance on volatile resource revenue. So, for example, over the last 2 years, more than 30% of the money that we spend on day-to-day operations of government and our public services comes from non-renewable resource revenue. And Albertans understand that we need to get off the resource roller coaster. We need to find more sustainable and stable ways to fund our vital public services. And in my previous platform planks, I argued that we New Democrats, if we want to win, we have to get over our reluctance to talk about the economy. But in this platform plank, I argue that if we want to actually be progressive when we form government, and if we need to have the resources that we need to actually implement a progressive agenda, then we have to get over our aversion to talking about taxes. So, and if we don't, we'll never be able to address one of the biggest real problems facing our province, which is, as I've discussed, is our absurdly dysfunctional revenue system. And we won't be able to give the province what it actually needs, and what, in my estimation, what our province really needs is full-throated social democratic programs and policies. But we won't be able to do that if we actually don't talk about taxes and have a plan for revenue reform. So Alberta needs New Democrats. They need us to be New Democrats, but we can't be true New Democrats if we're not willing to talk about taxes and deliver revenue reform. So in this platform plank, which you'll see on my website, I outline a vision for tax reform. And it's not just mine, and this is full disclosure. I'm bringing some ideas from civil society, from civil society into the leadership campaign. And so the ideas that I lay out, they actually were fleshed out by the Alberta Federation of Labour, which I lead, the Parkland Institute, Public Interest Alberta, and Friends of Medicare. Collectively, last year we developed something we call the Better Way Alberta Project. And so the ideas that I lay out in this plank on revenue reform are based on the notions that we can stabilize our finances and pay for programs and services we need by bringing Alberta into the Canadian mainstream. That was the point of the Better Way Alberta project. And we do it, we bring Alberta into the Canadian mainstream in terms of taxes and revenue generation by making profitable corporations and the wealthy pay their fair share. So the Better Way Alberta blueprint for revenue reform, from my perspective, should become the Alberta NDP's fiscal blueprint for the next election. And there's a lot of detail on the website, but I'm just going to sort of summarize the 5 big points that are suggested. So number one, In order to reform our revenue system, we need to implement a more progressive income tax system. Number two, we need to require wealthy corporations to pay their fair share. We currently have the lowest tax on corporate profits in the country. That needs to change. Number three, we need to consider introducing excess profits taxes and take the revenue that's generated by excess taxes on corporate profits, especially the ones who have been price gouging us and helping to create the cost of living crisis, and take that money and plow it back into services and programs for Albertans. Number four, we need to set higher minimum royalty rates and make royalty rates more progressive and more sensitive to increases in price. And five, we need to work with the federal government to establish a tax on wealth and luxury goods. I'm not going to go into any more granular detail on that, but that's the sixth platform. So I'm just going to now turn to the final platform plank, and that has to do with what I describe as climate resilience. In particular, I think that if the New Democrats want to appeal to that working class demographic that we need to appeal to in order to build our winning coalition, we need to create a sense of shared purpose among Albertans by calling on them to help build climate resilience in our province. And I say this because the UCP is winning among working class voters in part because they've been convincing them that climate change is something that we can worry about later, and that climate policy is something that will hurt our economy and undermine our prosperity. So in this regard, the UCP understands something that we New Democrats don't. And what they understand is that myth-making is upstream from voting. And the myth that they've created is that Albertans are oil and gas, and that action to address climate change isn't just an attack on our jobs and our economy, but also an attack on our very identity. So, I believe strongly that the NDP can only defeat the UCP if we counter their mythology in this regard with our own overarching narrative about climate change. Now, successful narratives have heroes and villains, they have threats and goals. The UCP narrative on climate change casts environmentalists, the federal government, and progressive, quote, elites as the villains. And ordinary Albertans are cast as the heroes, standing up to the threats to their jobs and their way of life. If I were the NDP leader, and obviously I'm not going to be, but if I were, I would champion a very different kind of narrative. Like the UCP narrative, the heroes in our narrative could be ordinary Albertans, but the threat that they're facing, wouldn't be, nasty elites. It would be the fires and the droughts and the economic disruption that is being caused by climate change. And the goal would be to work together to build resilience in our communities and our economy to face these threats. And the villains, because a good narrative always needs villains, but the villains in our narrative would be anyone who stands in the way of building that kind of resilience. So in a nutshell, I think that if we want to beat the UCP, we have to beat them at the narrative game. Specifically, we need to use the goal of building climate resilience as a tool to galvanize Albertans and create a sense of shared purpose, one that would give Albertans a real reason to support the NDP. So I'm just going to give you a quick summary of what an NDP climate resilience agenda could look like. The first thing is protecting our water. And I know if you've been following the leadership race, you know that I'm not the only one to talk about this. In particular, my fellow leadership candidate, Jody Calahoo-Stonehouse, has eloquently stated that water is life, and protecting our sources of water in the context of climate change needs to be a top priority for Albertans. And I couldn't agree more, because the threats to our water are real. Alberta has less than 3% of Canada's freshwater resources. These limited resources are being stretched by increasing demands from industry, especially agriculture and oil and gas, and also by our growing population, especially in the southern half of the province. Our water resources are also being threatened by changes related to climate change, things like low winter snowpack, shrinking glaciers, higher summer temperatures that increase evaporation. So the NDP can distinguish itself from the UCP by being the party with a real plan to address and manage water scarcity. So as you'll see from the plank on the website, the first thing I think that we have to do in this regard is to acknowledge the problem. The UCP can't even bring itself to admit that the water crisis is more than temporary. They sort of think, they like to leave the impression that it's a cyclical issue, and they certainly don't acknowledge that it's related to climate change. So in that regard, the NDP has to be a truth teller. Number two, the NDP has to commit to developing a comprehensive water management strategy. Number three, we have to commit to working with municipalities and industry to reduce consumption. Number four, we need to put people first in terms of water allocation. The biggest users of water in this province are agriculture and industry, especially oil and gas. Our municipalities are actually way down the list. We have to make sure that people are first, not corporations. Number five, we need to increase public investment in water solutions, and we also need to increase support for frontline innovators. We actually have all sorts of amazing organizations and really smart individuals who have been working on water solutions instead of trying, as the UCP seems to be focused on, like centralizing power control and decision making in the Premier's office. We actually have to look to our fellow Albertans who have been thinking deeply and for a long time about water solutions and give them the resources and the support they need to deal with these issues. Number six, we need to promote and support water efficiency efforts. Just as an example, when I was down in southern Alberta on the campaign trail, I talked to farmers about the irrigation agriculture system, which is built around all of these open canals. And so that's an infrastructure issue and there could be an infrastructure solution just by finding ways, spending the money necessary to cover the canals to reduce evaporation. That's an example. And finally, I think that it's really important for us to restrict development in the headwaters of our rivers and our watersheds. As I mentioned, Alberta only has 3% of Canada's freshwater resources. We are a naturally dry jurisdiction. And so water is scarce. Water was scarce 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and it's going to become even more scarce in the context of our growing population and climate change. And so we have to treat our watersheds with respect. And so, like the other candidates in this race, I'm calling for the government to re-embrace the Lougheed-era coal policy that restricted development on the eastern slopes. But I would actually go further. It's not just about coal development. It's also about other kinds of development, especially things like clear cutting at the headwaters of our big rivers. We simply need to have a more comprehensive strategy to make sure that the headwaters of our rivers are not contaminated and they're not diverted away from the uses that we need to focus on. So water is the first priority in terms of climate resilience. Second, we need to prepare for wildfires. So water scarcity is not the only climate change related threat facing Albertans. There is also a pronounced trend towards more and bigger wildfires. Last year, the largest area forest was consumed by fire in Canadian history. And even the UCP recognizes the trend towards more and bigger fires, even while they're denying the link to climate change. and the threats are multiple, right? To threats to life, to health, to property, to the economy. And another thing that I heard on the climate on the campaign trail is what is an under-discussed, but I think is a significant development, and that has to do with insurance. In the aftermath of last year's fires, and in the aftermath of fires in places like Fort McMurray and Slave Lake, business and residential insurance premiums in many rural areas and smaller communities has skyrocketed, which has dramatically increased the cost of living and the cost of doing business in those areas. So here's what I think an NDP wildfire strategy could look like. First, we have to have adequate staffing for our wildland firefighting services. I was told by some people working in the sector that less than half of the wildland firefighters who had been supporting our firefighting efforts last year have actually returned for work this year. And one of the reasons is because we pay less than other jurisdictions. So these wildland firefighters, why would they work in Alberta when they can get paid more in neighboring BC? And so we need to have a firefighting workforce strategy to make sure that we're paying enough to attract and retain employees. We have to recognize that this is seasonal work, and maybe we can find some way to make it more attractive by providing year-round employment. And honestly, it's just a question of respect, which is something that we keep coming back to with the UCP. They have not been showing adequate respect to public sector workers, whether they're healthcare workers, education workers, or whether they're working in areas like wildland firefighting. Second, we need to support the introduction of a comprehensive wildfire plan. This is something that the Alberta Association of Fire Chiefs asked for back in January. And like the chiefs, the rest of us here in Alberta, we're still waiting. And we don't just need a plan for 1 year. We need a wildfire plan for this new era of wildfires. Third, we need to reverse the cuts. I think a lot of Albertans understand that one of the first things the UCP did when they formed government in 2019 is cut funding for our wildfire rapid attack team. We also underfunded other parts of our firefighting program, like spotting, rapid response. We used to be able to actually mobilize very quickly to put fires out before they got big. And so this is an example of the UCP being penny wise and pound foolish. And we all pay the price for that. And then finally, in terms of the fire service, we need to fund fire safe programs and infrastructure for both individuals and communities and businesses. Other steps to build climate resilience, there are many, and I think this is important because in order to distinguish ourselves from the UCP, the NDP has to become the party of climate resilience as opposed to being the party of climate denial, which is the UCP. And as I've discussed, that means becoming a party with a plan to manage water scarcity. It also means becoming the party with a plan to manage the growing threat of wildfires. But there are a few more areas where we can show how we are the party with a plan to build the kind of climate resilience we need in the 21st century. So for example, we need to build climate resilience in the economy. And I discussed this in my first two planks, but climate change and the related energy transition are disrupting the global economy and in the process creating both threats and opportunities for our economy. The NDP needs to become the party with a plan to build economic resilience for Albertans in a world that's changing. While the UCP offers empty promises about maintaining the status quo, we should be the party with a plan for managing the risks and seizing the opportunities inherent in the unfolding global energy transition. And so I just encourage you to read plank number 1. That's what that was about. And then also we need to talk about climate resilience and citizen participation. And as my fellow leadership candidate Sarah Hoffman has argued, the effort to address climate change presents us with an opportunity to mobilize and galvanize Albertans in unprecedented ways. Following the lead of the Biden administration in the US, Sarah has suggested the creation of an Alberta Climate Corps to engage, hire, and mobilize thousands of young Albertans to work on climate mitigation projects around the province. They could be put to work building new infrastructure and implementing new programs aimed at building the kind of climate resilience that I'm talking about. They could also earn wages while they learn new skills, and I would enthusiastically support the creation of an Alberta Climate Corps. And then finally, there's the question of climate resilience and the budget. And as I outlined in my previous planks, including the one I just talked about on revenue reform, I would also look for new ways to raise money to fund this climate resilience agenda. For example, and this was part of my, I think, my first plank, the UCP is only using a portion of the money raised from the so-called TIER program, which is Alberta's carbon pricing scheme. They're only using a portion of the millions of dollars raised from that program to actually fund green programs and projects. I would make sure that 100% of those funds are used for projects that reduce emissions, build climate resilience, or diversify the Alberta economy. And as outlined in my revenue plank, I would also increase taxes on record corporate profits, especially in oil and gas, and also increase royalties on the sale of our publicly owned resource assets to help pay for this climate resilience agenda. So that was a long way of summarizing the two final planks. And so that's it. I'll have to admit that there's a couple of other things that came up in my many discussions with party members around the province on the campaign trail. So for example, I actually am thinking of putting together some notes on the need for support for programs related to domestic violence, to support disabled Albertans. There was even all sorts of conversations and anxiety about what AI is going to mean for our workforce. We could be the party that has solutions on all of those things. So that leads me to my final point. I'm putting these planks out there because I made a promise that I would do so. But more importantly, the candidates who remain in the leadership race have made it clear that regardless of who wins, they're all committed to having a robust conversation with party members in the lead up to the next provincial election. And they're looking for ideas. And so what I'm going to do is put these ideas together in a booklet, call it my green and orange policy book, and I am going to bring them to my fellow candidates for their consideration. I'm going to bring it to my constituency association, to the provincial council, of which I am a member. And I'm just going to put them on the table, and as everyone else will have an opportunity to be involved in these discussions about policy and strategy and platform. And I'm going to carry these ideas with me so I can participate in that conversation, both as a party member, but also as the president of the Federation of Labor. So that's what I'm going to do with these things. And in fact, I've already told my fellow former candidates to expect a letter with these platform planks, and they've all been very gracious in agreeing to meet with me and talk with me about these ideas. Before I open up for conversation, I just want to mention one final thing, and that has to do with money. If you read the email, and I think you probably did, the email that went out to all party members, that's probably why you're here. I asked for two things. I asked for you to join me to this meeting so you could see the two final planks in my platform. But I also made an appeal for a little bit more financial support. And I just want to make it really clear, I was sort of hesitant to do that, because my campaign has been suspended, but and you won't be contributing to a winning campaign. I get that. But the reality is that this campaign for all the candidates has been expensive. And so we did raise, somewhere in the order of $70,000, most of which went to pay the entry fee to the party and left us very little for the actual mechanics of running a campaign. So the website, staff, the travel, hotels, all that stuff. And so we actually do have a campaign deficit. In the email, I said it was about $7,500, and that was what we thought it was. It's a little bit higher than that because we realize now that we actually have to we're required by election finance legislation to do a formal audit of all our campaign fundraising and expenditures. And it turns out that it's going to cost us about $4,000 just to do the audit, which is a little bit more than we expected. So some of you have already been very generous, and we've received a few $1,000s over the last couple of days. But anything you could give would be greatly appreciated. And I want to make it clear that I've personally topped out in terms of what I can give. I probably would try to put more of my own personal money into this if I could, but the election finance law says that I can only give $5,000. Anything I'm actually violating the law if I give any more than that. So so I've given the maximum. A whole bunch of my friends have given the maximum, and family members, and the rest actually has to come from individuals, or else I'll have a deficit. I'm not the only candidate that's going to be in this position, so you might end up hearing about this from other candidates as well. I'm just the first one who's out of the game right now. But running these campaigns is really expensive, and so we need probably at this point, because we have received a few $1,000s in donations over the last day or two, and thank you very much for that if you've donated. But we probably need another $5,000 or $6,000, and so anything that you could give would be greatly appreciated. And so with that, Tom, I'm just going to wrap up and be happy to answer questions if people have them.
Thanks, Gil. So we do have a couple of folks who have their hands up, their Zoom hand up, and if you don't know how to put your hand up on Zoom, there should be a black ribbon along the bottom of your screen that says things like mute and stop video, that sort of thing. There is a place down there that says raise hand, or depending on your screen format, it might say more, and then there's the ellipse, the three dots. And if you click on the more, then you'll see that raise hand is on the menu that comes from that. So if you want to ask a question, raise your hand, and then we'll allow you to unmute yourself and ask your question to Gil. So the first person with the hand up was Scott. So Scott, if you're able to unmute and ask Gil your question, please go ahead.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Scott.
Hi. Hi, Gil. Again, sorry to hear that you're going to be dropping out of the campaign. I thought you were doing a good job.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
So my question in regards to revenue reform is we have a lot of people that fly in and fly out of Fort McMurray, right? So they'll fly from Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, wherever, and they'll work for CLAC up at Pearl Lake or CNRL, stay in the camp, then they'll get back on the plane and fly back to their home province. And I'm taking a real issue with this, Gil, because they're not contributing anything to the local economy when they do that. If they at least stayed in a hotel, they'd be spending money in some of the restaurants and bars and hotels and, helping make the economy grow. But when they do that, when they fly in, they stay in a camp, fly back out to their home province, and they want to live out there because their house is maybe $150,000 out east. And in Alberta, it's probably around $300,000 or $400,000. It's not helping us, and it's not helping the province, and they're taking advantage of the situation, quite frankly. And do you have a plan, or have you put any thought into how we might tax people that want to work here, but for whatever reason they don't want to be in Alberta themselves?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And I'll be honest that I've thought about the problem, but after spending time thinking about it, it's pretty clear to me that there's no simple solution, right? Because our tax system is set up in such a way that people are taxed in the jurisdiction where they live. So the normal structure for income tax doesn't provide a solution to the issue that you raise. I think that if there is a solution, it's almost like a step removed. I think that because what's happening here is that the business model adopted by the big oil sands companies is getting in the way of us getting our fair share from those workers, right? So they've built a model that is based on flying workers in and out. As you said, they're staying in camps. They're not staying in hotels. They're not renting accommodation while they're here. They're not spending money in the local economy. But that's not really the fault of the individual workers. It's the result of decisions made by the companies. And so it's not a perfect solution, but I think it gives more justification for the idea of increasing taxes on corporate profits, especially those big oil sands companies, who, by the way, over the last 3 years have recorded not just high profits, but record profits. They've never been more profitable in the history of their existence. So the last 3 years, more profitable than they've ever been. And they're actually plowing less of those profits back into projects and development here in Alberta. It used to be that 85-90% of their operating revenue went back into projects here in Alberta. Now it's less than 50%, and the rest of that money is going to share buybacks and increased dividends for investors, most of whom live outside of Alberta. This is all designed to boost their stock prices. And so the record profits, but most of them are leaving the province. So, and those profits are being made because they're exploiting our publicly owned resources. So I think there is a real strong case to be made that we need to right now we have the lowest corporate tax, the lowest rate of taxation on corporate profits in the country. It's only 8%. And the average is between 12 and 16%. And so if we returned to the Canadian average or something closer to it, we'd be generating billions of dollars of more revenue, and it'd be coming from the companies who've made that business's decision to build a business model based on fly in and fly out employees. It might give them more of an incentive to hire people here in Alberta, because I know that's part of the issue. They're using non-union companies or companies that have signed sweetheart deals with phony unions like CLAC, and they know that they're having a hard time, finding Alberta tradespeople want to work for those conditions. So that's one of the reasons they're flying people in and out. Yeah, I mean, if we were to to jack up their taxes closer to the Canadian average, that might, and make it explicit that's one of the reasons we're doing it, it might give them an incentive to hire local. Having said that, though, like the issue is one that deserves more attention, and if there's some idea about like some kind of surtax, I would encourage New Democrats to consider it, but there's not an off-the-shelf model that I can think of from any other jurisdiction in Canada that would allow us to do it that way. So I think increasing the corporate tax is one way to deal with it, but I think we should. It's a significant enough issue that it deserves more attention.
Thanks, Scott. Why don't we got Robert Frender with his hand up. So, Robert, if you'd like to put your question to Gil, unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you, Robert.
So one of my favorite movies Gil, is Woody Allen's Annie Hall. And one of my favorite scenes in that movie is Alvy Singer and Annie Hall are side by side on the screen, both in their psychiatrist's office. Alvy's complaining that they never have enough sex, and Diane's saying he wants sex all the time. And then their two psychiatrists ask them, exactly how much is that? And both of them say, I can't remember the exact amount, either 2 or 3 times a week. So my question for you is this. You keep saying that you want people to pay their fair share. Could you make more specifically, and would you be able, do you think you'd be able to do it if you were running, as the leader? What do you mean by this, the fair share of taxes in some specific amounts, percentages, something like that? How would you change specifically the current tax regime?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, and I think you asked it in a very creative way, so that's entertaining. Thank you for that. And it's a fair question, and you're right. It's one that we'd have to answer on the campaign trail, and I think that the easiest way to answer that question is to say that we here in Alberta should levy taxes on the wealthy and on profitable corporations in a similar way that is in place in other provinces. So, so for example, let me put it this way: that for the last 15 or 20 years, successive Conservative governments, both PC and UCP, have included this graph in every provincial budget, and what it shows is what they describe as the Alberta tax advantage. And basically, it shows how much more revenue Alberta would generate if they had the same tax structure as other provinces. And so, and they argue that this is something we should be proud of. I look at it very differently. But when I see the chart, it says basically the next slowest tax jurisdiction is Ontario, and what the chart shows is that if we had the same tax structure as Ontario, we would generate about $20 billion more in revenue every year. That's money that we could use for education, healthcare, infrastructure, climate resilience, diversification, all of that stuff. That's the next lowest, okay? And so what that tells me is that we could increase our tax take from taxes on corporate profits, taxes on people earning more than $150,000 a year, we could increase the tax take by $19 billion a year and still be the lowest tax jurisdiction in the country. So I would say that what we should shoot for is the Canadian mainstream. If we want to maintain our bragging rights as the lowest tax jurisdiction in the country, we can do that. But we can do it by, instead of having an 8% tax on corporate profits, which is the lowest in the country, we could return it to 12% where it was under the NDP, or heaven forbid 15% where it was under that radical Ralph Klein. And that would generate billions of dollars more revenue every year, especially now at a time of unprecedented profits for big oil sands companies. So the Canadian mainstream, I think, is the way that I would frame it. We could still be the lowest tax jurisdiction in the country and generate billions of dollars more that we need right now for our public services, to increase wages for our public sector workers, so that we can attract and retain healthcare workers, education workers, invest in all those things that I've talked about. So yeah, the Canadian mainstream, I think, is the target. And I think it's useful for people to compare us. Like, most people, they have no idea how much people pay in taxes in other provinces, and I think they buy these narratives that are repeated over and over by the UCP and the Conservatives before them, that we're the lowest tax jurisdiction. The reality is that we're actually not the lowest tax jurisdiction if you're a median income earner. So if you make $60,000, $70,000 a year, we actually pay more tax, personal income tax, than jurisdictions like BC and Ontario. It's only the top 7% of income earners, basically people who earn more than $150,000 a year, who have the lowest taxes. So corporations have the lowest taxes, and the highest income earners have the lowest taxes. That's the reality. And so I think that when we're talking about revenue reform, we have to, share that kind of information. So this argument that we're the lowest tax jurisdiction is only a half truth, and the target should be to raise enough revenue. And the final thing I'll say is that we shouldn't just be talking about how much we're going to raise and how we're going to raise it. I think it's really important that if we're going to talk about tax reform, we have to talk about what we're going to spend this revenue on. Because one of the ways that conservatives have been able to demonize taxation is by decoupling the process of raising revenue from what we're spending it on. So I think that the New Democrats need to get over their aversion of talking about this. Yes, the conservatives have demonized the conversation, but we need to jump into it. And the way we do that is by saying this is the revenue that we need to pay for the things that we value, like public health care, education, infrastructure, climate resilience, diversification, all the things that people know we need. There's no free lunch. People get that. But that, what I've put forward as a blueprint is the one that was put together by what I called the Better Way Alberta project. And that project basically said that we could raise between $15 and $20 billion a year more in revenue while still being the lowest tax jurisdiction in the country, and while not increasing taxes on the bottom 90% of Alberta income earners. So it would only be profitable corporations and the top 10% of earners that would be paying a little bit more, but that little bit more would be enough to pay for a whole heck of a lot of really important things.
Thanks, Gil. There's somebody who's identified just as a Zoom user, and I'm not sure who that is, but whoever you are, if you you can now, I'm sorry, hang on, you can now unmute and ask your question of Gil.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, this is Erin. I just wanted to say thank you so much for putting your name forward. I am so proud of how much you accomplished in this leadership race, and I look forward to our future with you as an AFL president, because I know we're in good hands.
Well, thanks, Erin. And just for everyone else, Erin was one of my most committed volunteers, and she put in countless hours along with her partner Rob, who is actually in the room with me right now doing the AV. And I just, for people like Erin and Rob, I just can't say, the time that you guys put in, the effort, the volunteer hours, it just means the world to me. Just couldn't have done it without you guys. So thank you.
And we have Wally Rowley, I suppose. If you can unmute and ask your question. Sorry if I butchered your name.
That's okay. It's a confusing aspect of having this handle. I would just remind you that you row, but unfortunately a scow. So it's not unusual to have this name mangled a little bit. I just wanted to follow up on Erin's comment, Gil. Thank you very much for your candidacy in this leadership campaign. Thank you also for bringing, I hope, an increased demographic awareness of a serious problem that the NDP faces provincially in Alberta. I sincerely hope that now that you are not a candidate for the leadership, that you will be seriously looking at running in a constituency in the unfortunately distant provincial in Alberta. I believe that you would bring important perspectives and experience to the table as a successful NDP candidate representing such a constituency. Now I have a question.
Sure.
And that is you have spoken about the complexities of interprovincial workers, and I'm just wondering if there's some way in which camp residency could be perceived as a taxable benefit being accrued by those out-of-province workers, and then perish the idea of interprovincial cooperation. Perhaps some method of home province documentation of those taxable benefits could be developed, and then have the taxation on those benefits revert back to Alberta as the province where those benefits were accrued. Just something to think about.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thanks, Wally. First, thanks for the kind words and the words of encouragement. Yeah, I will seriously consider perhaps running for the NDP, depending on what happens. Like 3 years is a long time in politics and in life, so we'll see. But I definitely, I mean, I threw my hat into the ring for the leadership because I wanted to be part of the next NDP government in this province, and obviously I won't be able to do that as leader, but I would love to be able to do it in another capacity. So that's something I will consider seriously. In terms of your suggestion about interprovincial cooperation on this question about the people who spend time in the camps, I'm not sure that any province would willingly give away the resources that would otherwise be going to them. However, I was thinking about the Better Way Alberta revenue blueprint, which I've based my revenue plank on. In that plank, they talk about luxury taxes, and as an example, and they point out that it's the federal government that would be levying luxury taxes on luxury goods, and the suggestion was that perhaps the provinces could lobby the federal government for a proportionate share of the revenue on taxation of luxury goods. And so maybe something similar could be done in this case, right? Because like every person, when they're paying their income tax, they pay a portion of their income tax to their home province, but they also pay actually a larger share of their income tax to the federal government, and then a lot of that money comes back to the provinces in the terms of transfer payments. So maybe there's an argument to be made with the federal government that given that the lion's share of this income had been earned in Alberta, that and they're collecting the federal portion, maybe there's some way that we could have a conversation with them about saying that some portion of that should come back to Alberta with the rest of because we get a lot of transfer payments from the federal government. I know the UCP wants us to believe that the federal government never does anything nice for us. Not to put too fine a point on it, that's complete BS. And in fact, transfers from the federal government are one of the biggest line items for revenue in any provincial budget, including Alberta's. And but because the federal tax would be on income earned on a project here, perhaps there is a way to talk to the federal government about getting a chunk of that. I hadn't thought about that. Like, I'm just sort of thinking about that in real time. But Alberta is the only jurisdiction that has such a significant portion of our provincial income generated by projects of that kind, with workers who are flying in and out. I mean, we have interprovincial mobility between every province, but there's probably no other province that has so many people from outside their province earning the bulk of their income in another province. So it's an interesting conversation, and so both you and Scott have piqued my interest in this. I'll see, and it's also a labor issue. So even as president of the Federation of Labor, it's probably something I'll want to think about. So thanks for the suggestion, and you've got the wheels going here. So I'll think about that some more.
Thanks, Gil. And I did have a question from Don McTaggart, who put it in its form of a chat, but be sure to answer that. Dan's question was just, about whether you'd consider running for the NDP in the next election. And he says, Gil, he says, the party needs thoughtful people like you. That was his comment.
Well,
So
thanks,
I
Dan.
think you've responded to that. If there's anybody else, we don't have any hands up right now, but if there's anybody else who'd like to put their hand up and be recognized to ask a question, please go ahead. And while we're just waiting, in case people are taking a second to do that, just remember that, Gil did make an appeal financially, and if you're able to help out the campaign and keep the ideas, basically funding the kind of ideas that Gil put forward, that would be really helpful and appreciated by everybody. I don't see anybody reaching for the raise hand button, Gil. So perhaps you have some final thoughts to leave us with.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'll just wrap up this afternoon by thanking everyone for joining us today, and thank many of you for the support that you've provided throughout the campaign. It's meant a lot to me. Obviously, everyone who's been involved in my campaign is disappointed that we had to suspend things and drop out of the race. But as I said at the outset, I do feel like we've accomplished something. We've put some ideas on the table for consideration by the other candidates, one of whom is going to become the leader. I know that members of the NDP caucus have reached out to me individually to tell me how happy they are that we're talking about things like the energy transition and revenue reform and worker rights and wage stagnation. These are things that weren't being discussed, but they are now. But perhaps most importantly, I think we have succeeded in reminding party members and members of the caucus and leadership hopefuls that the NDP is a workers' party. That's our history. I mean, the NDP was founded in 1961 by a historic partnership between the old CCF, representing farmers on one hand, and the Canadian Labour Congress representing workers on the other hand. We've found success with other demographics, and that success has allowed us to win a government in 2015 and contend very closely in 2019 and 2023. But the whole point of my leadership run was to remind people that we've lost, in many ways, the two groups that founded the party, right? For the rural vote and the worker vote. And in some ways, I think our path to future success is by getting back to our roots. And I want to make it really clear, but we have to hold on to this coalition that we've built of university educated urban dwellers. We share a lot of the same values. We're all Albertans, right? But that coalition has a hole in it, and that hole is some of the people who founded the party. So that's why I say that the path to victory for the New Democrats in 2027 actually relies on us remembering where we came from, right? So we win, I think, by holding on to the coalition that we've built, but we also win by remembering that we are and should continue to be the party of workers, and that we will win also by being more New Democrat, not less. So anyway, with that, it's been a fun ride. I think it's been productive, but now I'm just going to kick back a little bit and focus on my day job as president of the Federation of Labor. I'm also going to be at the debate in Edmonton tomorrow. But instead of being on the stage, I'll be in the audience cheering on my former fellow candidates and wishing them the best. But with that, I think I'll just wrap up and thank you for joining me. Thank you for your support, and let's continue to work together to build this party and defeat the UCP in the next election. Okay, thanks everyone. Take care.
Thank you, Gil.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks very much to Tom and Rob and Erica and Aaron and everyone else, and Leanne, my chief financial officer. thanks to all of them and all our volunteers for all the amazing support in this campaign. It's meant the world to me. Thanks, everyone.